There is a strangeness almost no one in your family is allowed to name. Not the parents who would interpret it as ingratitude, not the siblings who would worry the closeness was ending, not the friends who would think you were complaining about people who, by every external measure, love you, not the therapists who would file it under unresolved childhood wound when the strangeness is, in fact, something far older and far more developmental than any childhood reading can hold. You sit at the holiday table at 28, and you say the right things, and you laugh at the familiar jokes, and you mean each laugh, and underneath the laughing you are aware, for the first time in a clear way, that you are sitting with people who love you and who do not. You stand at 35 at a family gathering and you watch your parent across the room and you realize, quietly, without drama, without the kind of revelation a film would dramatize, that they have never, in your entire adult life, asked you the real question. The real question is the one you have been quietly hoping someone in the family would think to ask. They have not asked it. They are not going to ask it. And the not asking is not malicious. It is simply the architecture of the relationship as it was set up 40 years ago, and the architecture is what it is, and you can love them inside it without it becoming the architecture you would have chosen. You arrive at 41 to a family reunion, and you greet the sibling who grew up beside you, and you find slowly, across the course of the afternoon, that you have very little to say to each other anymore. The love is still there. The history is still there. But the inner lives have diverged so completely that you are, in the present, two strangers sharing a childhood vocabulary you no longer fully speak. You are not in a bad family. You are not in an estranged family. You are not, in any clinical sense, alienated. You are simply carrying a strangeness no one in your family has ever given you permission to feel. Carl Jung studied this exact strangeness for 40 years. He came to believe, by the late period of his clinical work, that the strangeness adults feel inside their own family of origin, in midlife, was one of the most misread emotional events in adult life, and one of the most developmentally important. He wrote about it in private letters more than in his published work, because he knew the observation was uncomfortable. Most psychology of his era, and most psychology of ours, treated family strangeness as either pathology, ingratitude, or unhealed childhood wound. Jung disagreed with all three readings. He thought the strangeness was a signal, not a signal of damage, not a signal of bad family, not a signal of failed love, a signal instead of something more honest. The slow developmental moment at which the adult self has grown beyond the role the family system invented for the child you used to be, and the family system, having no built-in capacity to update the role, continues to relate to the older version of you, even as the present version of you stands quietly in the same room. The strangeness you feel is not the absence of love. It is the present self recognizing that the room you are loved in was built for a younger version of you. This video is about what Jung actually saw. By the end, you will know the three forms family strangeness takes. You will know what the strangeness is asking for, and why what it is asking for is almost never literal estrangement. You will know why loving them more does not cure it. You will know the body signs nobody warns you about. You will know the cost of denying it. And you will know the strange, quieter relationship with the family that arrives when you finally let the strangeness translate itself. If you have stood recently at a family table or in a family room and felt, alongside the love that is real, a small, unspeakable strangeness that you could not name, this is the conversation Jung would want you to find. Let's start with what he actually saw. In Jung's clinical practice, he kept detailed case notes on his midlife patients' relationships with their families of origin. By the late 1930s, he had begun to notice a pattern that contradicted almost everything else in the psychology of family of his era. The pattern was this: midlife patients in fundamentally healthy families. Families where love was real, where contact continued, where the basic architecture had not collapsed, were arriving in his consulting room, describing a feeling they could not name. They said they loved their parents and did not feel close to them. They said they had grown up with their siblings and now had very little in common. They said the holiday gatherings were peaceful, And yet they walked away from each one with a quiet exhaustion they could not explain. The patients were ashamed. They had been told by their culture that the strangeness meant something was wrong, either with the family or with them. They had been told by previous therapists that the strangeness was unresolved childhood material. They had been told by friends to count their blessings and stop overthinking. None of these readings matched the texture of what they were experiencing. Jung listened. He took detailed notes across decades, and he came, by the late 1940s, to a conclusion that he wrote about with unusual personal directness in his late letters. He came to believe that the strangeness was not pathology. It was a developmental event. Every family system, he wrote, assigns roles to its children. The roles are not malicious. They are the system's way of organizing itself. The responsible one, the funny one, the quiet one, the difficult one, the bridge, the mirror, the keeper of the family mood. The roles get assigned by age 6. They become the medium in which the family interacts. The family loves the child the role describes, and the child grows up inside the role, and for the entire first half of life, the role and the actual self are close enough that the loving feels accurate. But the actual self continues to develop. The actual self, somewhere between 30 and 50, grows beyond the role. The family system, however, does not update. It cannot. The family system has no internal mechanism for revising a role assigned 40 years ago. So the family continues to relate to the role even as the role is no longer where the actual self lives. The strangeness you feel inside the family is the gap between the role they are loving and the self you have become. The gap is not the family's fault. The gap is not your fault either. The gap is the structural cost of any family system that lasts long enough for the children to develop into adults. The system was not built to accommodate. The strangeness, in other words, is the signal that the adult self has finished outgrowing the role. With that observation in place, here are the 3 forms. The first form is role fatigue. This is the strangeness of being in the family and feeling the role being applied to you, the family's continued treatment of you as the responsible one, the funny one, the quiet one, whichever role was assigned in childhood, when the actual self has long since outgrown the role. The role fatigue is not anger. It is not resentment in the loud sense. It is a slow inward turning when the role is applied, a small body sign that the family is not seeing the person you have actually become. The body sign for role fatigue is a tightening in the upper back when the family does the small thing that calls forth the old role. A particular phrase, a particular expectation, a particular silence at the moment you would, as the old role, have spoken. The tightening is the body registering that the role is no longer accurate. The second form is vocabulary strangeness. This is the strangeness of being unable to bring your actual inner life into the family vocabulary. The family has its own vocabulary, the topics it discusses, the topics it does not discuss, the kinds of questions that are asked, the kinds of stories that are told. The vocabulary was built around the original roles. The vocabulary has not updated either. When you try to bring your actual inner life into the room, it does not have words inside the family vocabulary, and you find yourself in the moment, either translating yourself into the family language, or simply not bringing the inner life into the room at all. The body sign for vocabulary strangeness is a small quiet across the throat at the dinner table. The throat is the body's register for what cannot be said in the available vocabulary. The strangeness lives there. The third form is temporal strangeness. This is the rarest and most subtle. It is the strangeness of being in a family system that exists, in some real sense, in a different time than the time you yourself inhabit. The family system is a temporal artifact. It carries the era of its parents' values, the rhythms of the decade it was built in, the cultural references of the years the parents formed their identities. The actual present, the actual current decade you live in as an adult, often does not match the family's temporal location. You are physically in the same room with the family, and yet, in some way you cannot fully articulate, you are inhabiting a different century from theirs. The body sign for temporal strangeness is the slow blink that arrives when a family member references an idea or a value you no longer hold in the form the family still holds it. You do not argue. You do not correct. You simply blink, and the topic continues. The blink is the body registering the temporal gap. The most important thing Jung wrote about family strangeness is this. The strangeness is never saying the family is bad. The strangeness is saying the adult self has finished outgrowing the role. This is the entire distinction between strangeness as pathology and strangeness as developmental signal. If the strangeness is about the family, about how they failed, how they hurt you, how they did not love you properly, the strangeness is grievance. Grievance is a real category. It is not what this video is about. Grievance has its own grammar and its own work and its own resolution. This video is about something different. What this video is about is the strangeness that arrives in families where the love was real and the wounds, where they existed, have already been worked through. The strangeness that remains after grievance has done its work is structural. It is not asking for repair. It is asking for recognition. The recognition is the work. What recognizing the strangeness produces, Jung observed, is a quieter, more accurate relationship with the family. Once you have acknowledged that the family is loving a role rather than the current self, you stop expecting the family to love the current self. The expectation was the source of much of the disappointment. Without the expectation, the disappointment quiets. The family becomes instead the people who knew the early version of you and who continue to love that version. And the loving is real even if it is not aimed at exactly the self you have become. The strangeness, in other words, is asking you to make a small inner adjustment. The adjustment is this. The family loves the early version of you. The family will continue to love the early version of you. The current version of you does not need to be loved by the family in the form it now exists in. The current version of you can be witnessed by other people, by partners, by friends, by chosen relationships built in adulthood, while the family continues to love the version it knows. This adjustment, Jung wrote, is one of the most under-recognized developmental tasks of the second half of life. The adult who can make it inhabits the family more peacefully than the adult who cannot. The adult who refuses to make it spends the second half of life trying to force the family to update the role, a task the family system structurally cannot perform, and the trying becomes the source of decades of unnecessary conflict. There is a counterintuitive observation in Jung's late notes about family strangeness. He observed that loving the family more did not cure the strangeness. He observed that visiting more often did not cure it. He observed that working harder to be understood did not cure it. The reason is that the strangeness is not a deficit of love. The strangeness is a structural gap that no amount of love can close. The family is loving the role. You are no longer the role. The love is real and the gap is real, and both can coexist. What does help, Jung observed, is what he called witnessing without demanding. Witnessing the family without demanding that they witness you in return at the level of the current self. The witnessing is one-directional. You allow yourself to see the family clearly, as people who carry their own roles, their own assignments, their own histories. You see them without trying to make them see you. The seeing is a gift to them. It is also a relief to you because the demand that they see you was producing more suffering than the unseenness itself. Practical things that honor the strangeness, drawn from his patient notes, enter the family room with the expectation of meeting the family system, not with the expectation of being met by the current self. Choose carefully what parts of your inner life you bring into the family vocabulary. Bring the parts the vocabulary can hold, leave the parts it cannot. Maintain a separate witnessing relationship outside the family, a partner, a long friend, a therapist, where the current self is the one being seen, so that the family is not asked to do work the family system cannot do, and honor the love that does arrive in the form it arrives, without insisting it arrive in the form you would have chosen. There are 4 body signs that mark family strangeness in adults. They are subtle. They run beneath conscious noticing for most people. Once recognized, they become diagnostic. The first body sign is a small upper back tightening the moment you arrive at the family home. The tightening is brief. It is not anxiety. It is the body preparing to inhabit the role. The second body sign is the throat quiet at the family dinner table when a real thought arrives that the family vocabulary cannot hold. The throat registers the unsaying. You eat. You answer the actual questions asked. You do not bring the unsayable thought into the room. The throat remembers. The third body sign is the slow exhale that arrives in the car or train on the way home from the family. The exhale is long. It is the body releasing the role. The release does not mean you are glad to be leaving. It means the body had been holding the older shape for the duration of the visit, and it is now allowed to relax back into the current shape. The fourth body sign is the unexpected tenderness that arrives later, sometimes hours or days after the family encounter. The tenderness is for the family as people inside their own roles, doing the best with the assignments their own family systems gave them. The tenderness is the present self's mature relationship with the family system finally beginning to form. There is a real cost to denying family strangeness. The first cost is that the visits remain unnecessarily painful. The pain is not from the visits themselves. The pain is from the unmet expectation that the family will see the current self. The expectation is structural. It cannot be met by the family system as it is built. Denying the strangeness means continuing to hold the expectation, which means continuing to be wounded by its non-fulfillment. The second cost is that the relationships with chosen people in your adult life are crowded. The work the family cannot do, witnessing the current self, gets unconsciously demanded of partners, friends, even children. They cannot do all of it on their own. The crowding strains the chosen relationships in ways that the actual closeness of those relationships does not deserve. The third cost is across decades. The mature relationship with the family system that Jung described, the witnessing without demanding, the love accepted in the form it arrives, takes years to develop. Adults who acknowledge the strangeness in their 30s arrive at a peaceful, integrated relationship with their families by their 50s. Adults who deny it spend the decades fighting a fight the family system cannot win. What arrives when you finally let the family strangeness translate itself is not a literal estrangement and not a sudden return to childhood closeness. It is a third thing the surrounding culture has very little vocabulary for. It is the slow, peaceful inhabiting of a family relationship that you no longer expect to do the work the family cannot do. The family becomes the people who knew the early version of you. The early version of you was real. The family loved it. The love continues. The current version of you exists in other rooms, chosen rooms, adult-built rooms, and is seen there. Both sets of rooms are real. Neither cancels the other. The peace that arrives is the peace of letting each room be the room it actually is. This is, Jung wrote in a late letter, one of the most under-recognized gifts of the second half of life. Not the gift of being seen by the family. The gift of letting the family love what they can love and finding the rest of the seeing somewhere else without resentment. There is one more piece worth naming before the close. The recognition that the family loves a version of you that no longer exists, while the current version goes unseen in their presence, often arrives with grief. The grief is real. It is not pathology. It is the part of you that had been hoping for a long time that the family would finally update, that some conversation, some milestone, some demonstration would finally make them see who you have become. The grief is the slow letting go of that hope. The hope was honest. The hope was natural. The hope is also structurally asking for something the family system cannot deliver. Letting it go is not betrayal of the family. It is the present self choosing reality over hope and choosing to find the seeing elsewhere, rather than continuing to wait for it in the room it cannot arrive in. Jung observed that the grief usually passes in waves. There is the first wave when the recognition arrives. There may be a smaller wave each time you visit and feel the old role being applied. The waves diminish across years. What remains at the end is not grief but a quiet, accurate, almost tender clarity about what each relationship in the family system can and cannot do. The tenderness is the inheritance of the recognition. The tenderness is the second half of life's quiet gift. Before you close this video, one small thing. Who in your family of origin feels most like a stranger to you now? You do not have to name them. Just say the relationship in one word in the comments below. Mother, father, sibling, grandparent, aunt, uncle, anyone. One word is enough. The next person who finds this video will read your word and know they are not alone in carrying the same kind of strangeness inside the same kind of relationship. You do not have to explain anything. You do not have to defend the feeling. Just name which relationship the strangeness lives most in for you. And if you have recognized yourself fully in this video, if the language has matched something you have been carrying for years without ever finding words for, you can add 777 next to your word. In the symbolic language Jung worked with throughout his life, 7777 marks the moment a person stops reading family strangeness as failure and begins to recognize it as the developmental signal it actually is. The mark is private. It is not an opinion. It is just a small confirmation you leave behind. So the next person who finds this video knows they are not alone in carrying it. If something in this video found you the way Jung said it would, at exactly the time you needed it, subscribe and stay close. There is more of this work ahead, and you were made for every layer of it. Until next time.